Hello guys. So now we shall be discussing what are the different kinds of neurons which we have got. Okay, we'll discuss what are the different kinds of neurons we have got and what are the different types of neurons we basically have in the nervous tissue, right? So a topic of discussion would be what is the structure of a neuron. First of all, we'll discuss what is the structure of the neuron. After that, we'll discuss what are the different kinds of neurons which we have got and where are these neurons present. Okay, so this is the discussion which we'll be having today. So first important thing is structure of a neuron and its types. So we shall be discussing about what is the structure and types of the neuron. Now, when it comes to the structure and the types of the neuron, first of all, you have to know these neurons, nerve cells or whatever it is, nerve fibers or whatever it is, and surrounding the neuron also you have got some cells called glial cells and all, right? So all these things are discussed under nervous tissue. All these things are the components of nervous tissue. So if you look at a nervous tissue has got few important components. For example, nervous tissue has got three important components. What are these three important components over here? One is called as neuronal tissue proper. One is called as neuronal tissue proper. So this is one very important thing. Second important thing is called as specialized connective tissue. CT in the sense connective tissue. And third important thing is called as ordinary connective tissue. Ordinary connective tissue. So what are the three important things? One is called as the neuronal tissue proper. Another one is called as your specialized connective tissue, and third one over here is called as your ordinary connective tissue. There are three important connective tissues, right? So first, let us discuss about this neuronal connective tissue. This neuronal tissue or neuronal tissue proper is what is having your nerve cells. Okay, so this is a tissue. This is a tissue which is having neurons. So what is the other name for neurons? Neurons are also called as your nerve cells. Neurons or nerve cells are present within this neuronal tissue. When it comes to specialized connective tissue, what do you have in specialized connective tissue? You have got what? Glial cells. Specialized connective tissue is comprising of glial cells. Okay, there are different types of glial cells. I will discuss about it later on. Third important thing is ordinary connective tissue. Ordinary connective tissue is having what? Meninges. Okay. So ordinary connective tissue is what is having your meninges. So coming to the meninges, we have got three important meninges. Just revise yourself. What are the three important meninges? We have got something called as dura mater. We have got something called as dura mater. And next important thing we have got is the arachnoid mater. Okay. And final important thing is the pia mater. So we have got two important things. One is called as a dura mater, another one is called as your arachnoid mater, and the third one is called as your pia mater. So first what we will do is that we shall discuss each and everything. Okay. First we will start our discussion with the neurons or the nerve cells. First of all, let me draw the structure of the neuron or the nerve cell, and then I will discuss about the remaining components like glial cells and all. And I think I have already recorded a video on the meninges where I discussed about the dura, arachnoid as well as the pia mater. Okay. So now our topic of discussion would be on the structure of a neuron. Structure of a neuron. So coming to the structure of the neuron, all of you know this because you have been studying it many times, every batch, right? Even from your plus 1 and plus 2, even before that also, you studied this, right? So coming to this, it has got this particular structure which you can see. This is what is called as your cell body. Okay, what is this called? This is called as a cell body. And the cell body goes all the way down. From the cell body, you see a structure that is coming down all the way like this. So this structure that is coming down all the way from the cell body is what is called as your axon. Now, the tip of the axon, the terminal part of the axon is having this kind of terminal. This terminal is called as your axon terminal. Okay, this is called as your axon terminal. Next important thing. If this is a cell body, What is the structure that is present exactly in the center? The structure that is present exactly in the center is what is called as the nucleus of the cell body. Okay. Next important thing is that if you look on the top of the cell body, you have got such processes like this. Okay. You see some processes which are located on the top of the cell body. So these processes which are located on the top of the cell body are what are called as your dendrites. Okay, so these structures over here are called as your dendrites. So these structures are called as your dendrites. Dendrites, what is the use? Dendrites, they receive the information. Dendrites are also called as neurites. Okay. Now, surrounding the cell body, are there any other structures? Yes. Surrounding this cell body, we have got these green colored dots here. These green colored dots over here are nothing but called as your nissal substance. Okay, so these green colored dots over here is nothing but called as your nissal substance. This is called as your nissal substance. Okay. Next important thing is that what is actually this nissal substance? Nissal substance is nothing but your rough endoplasmic reticulum. Right? The rough endoplasmic reticulum itself is called as the nissal substance. And by the way, this structure over here, not to be forgotten, this is called as your nucleus. This is called as your nucleus. And next important thing is that if you closely concentrate here, exactly at this part, you see this part, there is no nissal substance, right? So this is the part where there is no nissal substance at all. So this part where there is no nissal substance, and this part is also giving rise to a structure called as axon down, right? So this part is what is called as axon hillock. Okay, what is this structure over here called as? This structure over here is called as axon hillock. Okay, so what is the function of this axon hillock? The most important function of this axon hillock is that this is the place where the action potentials are generated. The electrical impulses are generated. All of you know what is the main function of a neuron? The neuron fires electrical impulses or action potentials, right? These action potentials have to be generated somewhere. So where are these action potentials generated? They originate or they generate. The generation starts from the axon hillock. So axon hillock is so what I was telling you, that axon hillock is the place where the action potentials are generated. So this is the place where the action potentials are generated. Generate action potentials. Generate action potentials. Okay. And second important thing you need to know, generate action potentials, or I can also tell it as the origin of all the action potentials, they start from this point only. Okay. Right. So this is your axon hillock. Down here, you have got this long structure which is hanging down. This structure over here is what is called as your axon. This is called as your axon. Now, what is this structure then? This structure is called as your cell body. Don't think the center one is called cell body. No, center one is called as a nucleus. This structure over here is called as the cell body, or the other name is perikaryon. The other name is perikaryon. Okay. Next important thing is that if you look at these structures over here is called as axon terminals. Axon terminals. Okay. The tip of the axon terminals have such process. These are called as terminal buttons. Terminal buttons or terminal buttons. Okay. Right. Now, if we look, what are the different kinds of organelles that are located within your cell body? So, what are the different kinds of organelles? So, now just tell me what are the different kinds of organelles that are located. The first organelle, which I have already told you, that there is something called as nissal substance, which is nothing but called as your rough endoplasmic reticulum. So, nissal substance is one of them. Nissal substance is one of them. And second important thing is neuronal filaments also. I cannot draw it here, but there are some structures called as neuronal filaments. So two important things over here. One is called as the nissal substance and the second one is called as your neuronal filaments. These are the two structures that are located or considered as organelles within this cell body over here. Okay, right. Next important thing over here is that we have to discuss something called as glial cells, right? So we are done with the discussion of the neurons or the nerve cells. Now the second important cell we will be discussing is the glial cells. So when I discuss about the glial cells, how many different types of glial cells do we have? Yes, how many different types of glial cells do we have? We basically have got two different groups of glial cells. Okay, we have got basically two different groups of glial cells. What are these two different groups of glial cells? One group of glial cells are called as central glial cells. Other group of glial cells are called as peripheral glial cells. Okay, one group is called as your central glial cells and the other group is called as your peripheral glial cells. Peripheral glial cells. So there are two important groups of glial cells. One you call it as what? You call it as a central glial cells and the other one you call it as a peripheral glial cells. So central glial cells are the glial cells which are present within your central nervous system and peripheral glial cells are the glial cells which are present within your peripheral nervous system. Okay. So when it comes to the central glial cells, what are the central glial cells we can list out? So basically we have got four important central glial cells. Okay, so what are these four important central glial cells? The first important central glial cell is nothing but called as your oligodendrocytes. Oligodendrocytes. After this oligodendrocytes, the second type of cell is called as your astrocytes. Second type of cell is called as your astrocytes. Third important cell is called as your microglial cells. Microglial cells. And the fourth important cell is called as your ependymal cells. Ependymal cells. You know what are these ependymal cells? You know we have got ventricles. We have got first ventricle, second ventricle. We have got third ventricle. We have got something called as diencephalon where the third ventricle is present. Next we have got the fourth ventricle. So all these ventricles inside are lined by an epithelium, ciliated epithelium, and this ciliated epithelium is nothing but called as your ependymal cells. Okay, right. Next important thing is peripheral glial cells. So what are the list of these peripheral glial cells? Actually there are two important groups of peripheral glial cells. One is called as Schwann cells. One is called as Schwann cells and the second one is called as your satellite cells. Satellite cells. So now what we shall do is that we shall actually discuss what are oligodendrocytes and we shall also discuss what are Schwann cells. Okay, these two are very, very important. Now, what is the important thing which you need to know? For example, let us say that this is your cerebral cortex, right? Let us say that this is your midbrain over here. Next, you have got your pons. Next, you have got your medulla oblongata, which is continuing down as your spinal cord, right? You very well know that there are neurons that are present in your central nervous system in this way, right? You also know that there are neurons that are coming out of the central nervous system. You see, there are neurons that are coming out of the central nervous system. Now, the neurons that are present within your central nervous system are called as what? They are called as central nervous system neurons. And the neurons that are coming out of the nervous system are considered as peripheral nervous system. Okay, so these are the neurons that usually supply to your heart and all, right? The peripheral nervous system. Now, if you look at this central nervous system neurons, so what is the important thing you need to know? What is the important thing is that surrounding these neurons, if you closely look at this picture, you see surrounding these neurons, there is something like a sheath like thing is present on either sides, right? So what is this sheath which I'm drawing right now? This sheath is nothing but called as your myelin sheath, right? Even surrounding your peripheral nervous system also, you see a sheath like this, right? Surrounding your peripheral nervous system also. So this sheath which is surrounding your peripheral nervous system is also called as your myelin sheath. But the important thing is that myelin sheath in the central nervous system is formed by which kind of cells? And second important thing is how myelin sheath in the peripheral nervous system is formed. For example, if you look, this myelin sheath which is located in the central nervous system is formed by a group of cells called oligodendrocytes. oligodendrocytes. And this group of this myelin sheath over here in the peripheral nervous system is formed by a group of cells called as Schwann cells. Schwann cells. So what are the two important things we have seen here? One is called as oligodendrocytes and the other one is called as the Schwann cells. Okay, so oligodendrocytes perform myelination for the neurons of central nervous system or peripheral nervous system, central nervous system. In the same way, Schwann cells, they perform myelination for the neurons of which cells? Neurons of which neurons? That is a peripheral nervous system. Right, so this is all you need to know regarding these astrocytes, which are star-shaped cells, microglial cells, ependymal and satellite cells. You'll study very much detail in your histology. Okay, so now what we shall do is that we shall discuss what are the different types of neurons. We discussed what is the structure of the neuron, and now we shall be discussing about what are the different types of neurons. Now, discussing what are the different types of neurons. First of all, neurons are classified on many number of types. For example, based upon number of poles, neurons are classified. For example, based upon number of poles, neurons are classified. Based upon, let us say, what is the length of the neuron, neurons are classified into different types. Shorter length neurons, longer length neurons. Based upon the structure also, neurons are classified. So let us see what is this classification. Okay, so the first important thing is based upon the number of poles. Based on number of poles, the neurons are classified. How are they classified? For example, let us say, let us take that this is a neuron. This is a cell body of the neuron. Okay. Now, from this neuron, you know that dendrites are coming away, right? So these are the dendrites which are branching on the top surface like this. You also see the axon that is coming down and dividing into two terminal part here, right? So this is a terminal part of the axon. So now, how many poles does this cell body is consisting of? All I want you to know is just focus on the cell body. Attached to the cell body, how many points are there? See, this is one pole, this is another pole, this is the third pole, and down here this is the fourth pole. So how many poles are there? 4 poles. It means more than one pole. So more than one pole, can I call it as multipolar? So such neurons are called as multipolar neurons. Such neurons are called as multipolar neurons, right? So where are these multipolar neurons? Why these are called as multipolar neurons? Because they are having multiple poles. Because they are having multiple poles, so you call these neurons as multipolar neurons. And where are these multipolar neurons present? There are 3 important examples where these multipolar neurons are present. First important example is cerebral cortex, right? So first important is cerebral cortex. And tell me guys, in cerebral cortex, do we have a gray matter or white matter? Yeah. For example, if this is your cerebral cortex like this. This is your cerebral cortex. See, this pink color line which I am drawing right now is what is called as your cerebral cortex, right? Now, all of you remember, whether it might be cerebrum or whether it might be cerebellum, the concept is same. That in cerebrum and cerebellum, you have got outer gray matter. Outer gray matter is present, and in the center you see this is your inner white matter. Outer gray matter is present and inner white matter is present, whether it might be your central nervous system, whether it might be your cerebrum or cerebellar hemisphere. Okay, so whether it might be your cerebrum where you have the cerebral hemispheres, whether you have got your cerebellum, in both of them the same. Outer is gray matter and inner is white matter. So here cerebral cortex. So this outer gray matter part, whatever is there, is called as the cerebral cortex. The same thing goes for cerebellum also. So the second example over here is cerebellar cortex. The second example here is cerebellar cortex. And third important thing is anterior horn of your spinal cord, right? So just look here. Let us say this is your spinal cord over here, right? So I have already recorded a lecture on the spinal cord. I just want you to go through this lecture, okay? So if this is your spinal cord over here, a cut section of spinal cord. So whenever you see a spinal cord, what you need to do is that you need to just divide the spinal cord imaginarily into 2 parts. Okay. So now the upper part is called as the posterior part, which is also called as the dorsal part of your spinal cord. Next, the lower part is called as the anterior part, or you can also call it as a ventral part of the spinal cord. Okay, posterior part or dorsal part. This one is anterior part or ventral part. Now, you see these horns over here. You see these two horns. So these horns are called as dorsal horns. How many dorsal horns? On the right side we have got, on the left side we have got. And here also these two are called as ventral horns of your spinal cord. So the third important thing is anterior horn or ventral horn of spinal cord. Anterior or ventral horn of spinal cord. Ventral horn of spinal cord is having such neurons called as multipolar neurons, which means, see, there is a neuron like this. There is a neuron, and this neuron is coming out in this way, and this neuron is having multiple dendrites. So multipoles from multipolar region of the cell body, you see these structures are coming out. So obviously this is a multipolar neuron. And basically tell me, what is the function of this neuron in the anterior or the ventral part? This neuron is a motor neuron or a sensory neuron. This neuron is a motor neuron, right? And where is the sensory neuron? All the neurons that are present above this line are sensory neurons, and all the neurons that are present below this line are motor neurons. Okay, so obviously this will be a motor neuron. So write it in the bracket that this would be your motor neuron. Motor neuron. Okay, so this is the first discussion, that is your bipolar neuron. So multipolar neuron. The second important neuron. Now coming to the second important neuron, just look at this. This is the nucleus. This is your cell body. Now coming out of the cell body, we have got dendrites like this, right? And next we even have got axon, which is having an axon terminal. Now tell me, what kind of neuron is this? First of all, you have to say how many poles are present. See here we have got one pole, right? Here we have got another pole. Only from two poles of the cell body, these structures are coming out, or these processes are coming out. So these two are together, you call it as bipolar. So obviously such neuron over here is called as your bipolar neuron. Such neuron over here is called as your bipolar neuron. Okay. Now coming to this bipolar neuron, what are the important things? What are the important examples? There are basically two important examples you should know, that all of you know that from the nasal region, there is a nerve that is going up. It passes the cribriform plate and then enters into the frontal cortex, frontal lobe, right? So what is this neuron called as? This neuron is nothing but called as your olfactory neuron, that is cranial nerve nuclei number 1. So that neuron is called as olfactory neuron. So olfactory neurons are bipolar neurons, okay? So olfactory neurons are bipolar neurons. And second important neurons is within the eyeball, you have got retina. So retina of the eyeball has got some neurons, and these neurons are called as again bipolar neurons. Retina of eyeball is what is called as your bipolar neuron. Okay, right. So bipolar neuron is done. Now after this discussion of bipolar neuron, the third important thing which we shall discuss is unipolar neuron. Unipolar neuron. Now unipolar neuron has got another name. The name is pseudounipolar neuron. Why it is called as pseudounipolar, I will tell you. Pseudounipolar neuron. So why it is called as pseudounipolar neuron? First important thing, let us see what is a unipolar neuron. See, this is your nucleus of the cell body, and this is a cell body. Now from the cell body, you see a structure that is coming down, and it is dividing into two parts. Okay, so what are these two parts over here? One is called as the central process. One is called as a central process, and the other one is called as a peripheral process. So one process you call it as a central process, and the other process you call it as a peripheral process. Second important thing over here is, to the one end of the cell body, you see a small dot over here. By the way, I'm representing the pole. So from how many poles of the cell body are these structures arising? They are arising from a single pole, right? So can I call such neurons as your unipolar neurons? such neurons over here are called as your unipolar neurons. Okay. Now, why are you calling it as pseudo-unipolar neurons? There is a reason behind that. The reason is that, all of you look here, initially, during the developmental process, this is your cell body. During the developmental process, one process came onto the right, one process came onto the left. Now tell me how many poles are there here? Obviously, two poles are there. So obviously, this neuron should be called as a bipolar neuron. But later on, what happened? Later on, what happened is that within the center of the cell body, you see a small depression. See, this is a depression. You see, there is a small depression like this, and this is the nucleus here, right? Obviously, attached to the depression here, you have got one process in the center, one is central process, another one is peripheral process. Now, what is this structure, this depression like structure doing here? What it is doing is that it is pulling both the central process and the peripheral process together. When it is pulling the central and peripheral process together, what is happening in the next step? What is happening in the next step is that this is how it forms. This is how it forms, right? Now tell me, what is this neuron over here? This is a unipolar neuron, right? And what about this depression? See, you see this structure over here. You see this structure, right? So this structure later on modified into like this. This structure later on modified in this way, and finally it modified like this. Okay, so but what it has done, it has brought both the structures together. So overall it looked in this way. Okay, so here we have got the central process, we have got the peripheral process. So how is it looking? It is looking as if this cell body has got only one pole, and from this single pole these structures are arising. So this is a unipolar neuron, but if you know the developmental process, then you would tell that this is not a true unipolar neuron. It is a false unipolar neuron. Then what is the truth behind this? The truth behind this is that this is a bipolar neuron. Okay, so that is the reason why you call this as a pseudo-unipolar neuron. Okay, let us look at the examples of where this pseudo-unipolar neuron is present. Okay, so the first important example over here is your spinal ganglia. Spinal ganglia is one such structure. Where is your spinal ganglia present? Where is your spinal ganglia present? Your spinal ganglia is present within your spinal cord. Let us say this is your spinal cord over here. You see this structure over here? This structure is called as your dorsal horn, and this structure over here is called as your ventral horn. The same structures are present on the opposite side also. Now you see this kind of swelling over here. This swelling is nothing but called as your spinal ganglion, or this swelling, where it is present on the dorsal side or it is present on the ventral side? It is present on the dorsal side. So you can also call this as a dorsal root ganglion. So this is called as your dorsal root ganglion. Okay. So dorsal root ganglion, which is also called as your spinal ganglion. So this is your first example. Second important example which you can see is your sensory ganglion. Sensory ganglion. So sensory ganglion of what? Sensory ganglion of all the cranial nerves? No. Sensory ganglion of 5th, sensory ganglion of 7th, sensory ganglion of 9th, and sensory ganglion of the 10th cranial nerve. Okay, so 5, 7, 9 as well as 10th cranial. Okay, so this classification so far, whatever we have discussed here, this is based upon what? Based upon the number of poles. Based upon the number of poles we discussed, one is called as our multipolar neuron. Second one we discussed as bipolar neuron. Third we discussed as unipolar or the pseudo-unipolar neuron. Okay. Now what we shall do is that based upon poles, there is one more. What is another thing? Such neurons are called as, okay, let me first draw the picture and then I will write down the name. So this is the cell body, right? Now from the cell body, you see these structures that are coming out, right? So what are these structures which are coming out? These are called as your what? Dendrites, right? Is there any axon over here? No, there is no axon over here. Now, can I tell that such neuron is not having any axon, and such neurons are called as anaxonic neurons? So such neurons are called as what? Anaxonic neurons. So such neurons are called as anaxonic neurons. So anaxonic neurons are having axons. There are no axons. But what are they having instead? They are having only dendrites. They are having only dendrites. You know, where are these cells present? Within the retina, you have got some specialized cells. If you look at the layers of retina, within the layers of retina, we have got in one layer, you have got special cells called as amacrine cells. In ophthalmology, you will study, okay? So, amacrine cells of the retina. So, these amacrine cells of the retina is what is having your anoxic neurons, okay? Right. After this anoxic neurons, the next neurons here we have got is apolar neurons. Apolar neurons. Now, what do you mean by these apolar neurons? What do you mean by these apolar neurons? Is that, for example, let us say this is a cell body like this. It is not having dendrites. It is not having axons also. So, such neurons where there is no pole at all, no pole in the sense, no axons and no dendrites. So, such neurons are called as apolar neurons. You know, where are they present? For example, let us say this is your kidney, right? On the top of the kidney, you have got a structure. What is this? This structure is called as your adrenal gland. And the center part of the adrenal gland, right? This center part of the adrenal gland is called as your adrenal medulla. Adrenal medulla. So, in the adrenal medulla part, you have got such neurons. These are called as apolar neurons, right? So, this classification, whatever I have told you so far, is based upon the poles. One pole, unipolar, two poles, bipolar, more than that, multipolar, sometimes no poles, sometimes only dendrites, no axons. Okay, right. So, we are done with one classification. Second important classification over here is classification based on the function of a neuron. Based on function of a neuron. So, before I write down what are the four different types of neurons over here, first of all, what I'll do is that I'll just draw the picture, okay, and then I will explain you what are the different kinds of functions we have got, okay. So, if I have to draw the picture, I have to draw the picture of your spinal cord. Right. So, here, so you see this cut section here, right? So, this is actually the cut section of your spinal cord, right? So, this is your cut section of your spinal cord. Now, in this cut section of the spinal cord, there are few important things that I have to discuss over here, which are very, very important. So, obviously, not to forget that the central part over here we have got is the spinal canal like this, right? Next important thing is, whenever you see a spinal cord, what you need to do? You need to divide the spinal cord imaginarily into two halves. The upper part is always called as the sensory part. Why? Because the neurons which are present here are purely sensory neurons. Next, the lower part is always called as a motor part. Why? Because the neurons which are present over here are called as a motor neurons. Okay, right. Next important thing is that here you have got this particular structure. This is called as dorsal root like this. Okay, and here you have got a particular structure called as ventral root. Now the dorsal root and ventral root, both of them join together to form this particular structure called as spinal nerve. Now the same picture is also present on the other side also. Okay, right. And by the way, if you remember, I have told this thing called as spinal ganglion or dorsal root ganglion. This is called as a spinal ganglion. If you find these lectures very slow, then immediately fast forward the video. Okay, spinal ganglion. Okay, right. Next important thing over here you need to look here is that, see, this is a neuron like this. And in the spinal ganglion, what kind of neuron did we discuss? In the spinal ganglion, we discussed pseudounipolar neuron, right? So let us see this. You see, one central process is there for this pseudounipolar neuron and one peripheral process that is going out. So this is called as pseudounipolar neuron. Second important thing is that from here you see another neuron that is going out all the way like this, right? And this neuron, not to forget, it is having many dendrites like this. So this neuron is called as a multipolar neuron in the examples we have discussed, right? Now in between this pseudounipolar neuron and this multipolar neuron, you have got a third type of neuron like this. You see, this third type of neuron is called as intermediate neuron. or you can also call it as internuncial neuron, intermediate neuron or internuncial neuron. Okay, so what is this neuron over here? This neuron has got only one function, that is called as sensory function. So this is a sensory neuron. And what is this neuron over here? This neuron has got only one function, that is a motor neuron. And motor neuron and sensory neuron together they joined, and they joined in which structure? What is this structure here? This is called as your spinal nerve. This is called as your spinal nerve. Okay, right. So based upon the function, what can I write? One thing I can write is that we discussed about sensory neurons. We discussed about sensory neurons. We discussed about motor neurons. We discussed about motor neurons. We discussed third important thing about intermediate neurons, intermediate neurons, or you can also call it as internuncial neurons. Intermediate neurons, or you can call it as internuncial neurons. And the fourth important neurons which I'll be discussing right now is called as your autonomic neurons. Autonomic neurons. You know what are the two types of autonomic neurons we have got? We have got neurons like sympathetic neurons and parasympathetic. Sympathetic as well as parasympathetic neurons. So sympathetic as well as the parasympathetic neurons, right? So this explanation whatever I've given you is the neurons classification based upon the function. Now what I'll be telling you is the neurons classification based upon the length of the axon. Based upon what? Based on the length of the axon. Based on the length of the axon. Now, based upon the length of the axon, you have got two important types of neurons. For example, one neuron is called as Golgi type 1 neurons. Golgi type 1 neurons, and the second type of neurons which you have got is the Golgi type 2 neurons. Golgi type 2 neurons. So what are the two different types of neurons? One is called as the Golgi type 1 neurons, and second type of neuron is called as the Golgi type 2 neurons. So Golgi type 1 neurons are also called as long neurons because they have got very long axons. So these axons are very, very long. And the Golgi type 2, obviously the opposite would be short axons. So these are having what axons? These are having short axons. So one group are having the long axons, other group are having the short axons. Second important thing is that whenever a neuron is cut or whenever a nerve is cut, for example, your radial nerve is cut, or let us say your median nerve is cut or ulnar nerve, whatever it is, if a nerve is cut, do you think the nerve will regenerate? No. Once a nerve is cut, that's it. The actions are lost. The nerve cannot be regenerated. Why? Because in association with the nerves, within the nerves, there are nothing called as centrioles. There usually we have some structures called as centrioles. You know what is the use of these centrioles? Centrioles are responsible for cell division. Centrioles are responsible for cell division. If you have centrioles, there will be a capacity to regenerate. There will be a capacity to divide the cell. If you don't have centrioles, then there is no cell division. So why your neurons are not regenerating? Why your neurons are not dividing? The reason is that we don't have centrioles. But you know, we have got something called as olfactory neuron. Olfactory neurons or olfactory nerves, your first pair of cranial nerve. These olfactory nerves are having centrioles. So centrioles are present to these olfactory neurons. So if centrioles are present to these olfactory neurons, now if I damage my olfactory neurons, will they regenerate back? Yes. New olfactory neurons will be formed. Okay. So that is the important thing I want to tell you. So let us just revise the things which we have discussed and then we shall continue discussing the next topic. Okay. We started our discussion all the way from the structure of the neuron and its types. So basically three different types. One is called as neuronal tissue proper. Next one is called as your specialized connective tissue, and the third one is called as your ordinary connective tissue. Now within this, neurons and nerve cells are present, here glial cells are present, and here meninges are meninges, which consists of your dura, arachnoid and pyramidal present. And remember one thing, the organelles that are present within this neuron are called as nissal substance and neuronal filaments. Okay. So here, what are the things that are present? Nissal substance. What is nissal substance? This is a very important question. Nissal substance is nothing but called as your rough endoplasmic reticulum. Okay. Next, where does the action potentials originate? This is very, very important. The action potentials, they originate in a part called as axon hillock. There are two different types of glial cells. One is called as the central glial cells and the one is called as your peripheral glial cells. Central glial cells are oligodendrocytes, astrocytes, microglial cells and ependymal cells. Here we have got Schwann cells as well as satellite cells. Okay, right. So oligodendrocytes, they form the myelin sheath of the neurons that are located in the central nervous system, whereas Schwann cells form the myelin sheath of the neurons that are located in the peripheral nervous system. Okay, coming to the types of neurons. Types of neurons are based upon different classification. One classification is based upon the poles. Based upon the poles, the first one, what do we have? Multipolar neuron, which have got multiple poles. What will be the examples here? Cerebral cortex, cerebellar cortex, and anterior horn of the spinal cord, through which the motor neurons, they come out. Second, bipolar neuron examples, olfactory neuron and retina of the eyeball. Third one, unipolar or pseudounipolar. What will be the examples? Why it is called as pseudounipolar? You should know it, right? Even if you don't know it, just remember it as pseudounipolar. Just remember the examples. One is spinal ganglion and sensory ganglion of 5th, 7th, 9th as well as 10th cranial nerves. Next, anoxic, no axons, only dendrites. Hemacrine cells of retina is the example. Apolar neurons are present in your adrenal medulla. Based upon the function, I have discussed that there are something called as sensory neurons, motor neurons, intermediate and autonomic neurons. Okay. So based upon the length, long axons are called as type 1, short axons are called as type 2. Okay. Now centrioles, obviously, where are the centrioles present? Only to the olfactory nerve, and that is the reason why olfactory nerve, once damaged, can be regenerated, right? So these are all the important things you need to know regarding the structure and the type of the neuron, guys. So thank you so much for watching my video. Goodbye.